Hi, in this video, we'll dive into setting up a system agnostic development workflow in Windows. Ideally, there are three approaches to this. You could set up everything natively on Windows, you can use Linux using WSL, or you could do the development work in dev containers. In this video, I will show you how to set up everything natively on Windows. In upcoming videos, I will talk about WSL and dev container. The first thing that we will need is a package manager. In different operating systems, there are different package managers. For instance, if you use Debian based distribution like Ubuntu, you can use apt package manager. If you're using Arch Linux, you could use Pacman. If you are using Fedora, you could go with TNF. So there are different package managers on different distributions. In Windows, there are 2-3 choices. We could go with Winget, Scoop, and Chocolatey. Winget is relatively new, but this is highly recommended because this comes integrated with Windows machine. Verify that Winget is installed in your system. You could run Winget version. If you don't see a version and it throws an error or some kind of output saying that the command is not found or not installed, then you have to reinstall Winget. For that, you could refer to the official documentation. In the official guide, they have added only one prerequisite that you must be using Windows 10 with version higher than 1809. 1809 basically implies that this version was released in 2018 on the 9th month, which is September. So if you haven't updated your system since then, well, I think you should update it. Once you have done that, there is a command at the end of it. You could copy paste this command in PowerShell. Once you have that, it will install Winget for you. Just restart your PowerShell, just close that window and open again, and you will see that Winget is working perfectly for you. Once you have done that, you need to install three important things. You need to install a terminal emulator, you need to install a shell, and you need to install a text editor or IDE. So for terminal emulator, there are multiple choices, but we can use Winget to search available terminal emulators. Just search for Winget search terminal, that will list out tons of tools. Not everything is a terminal emulator, but we could find a couple of known ones. For instance, we will see Alacrity over here. We can also find console, which is the KDE terminal emulator, and there must be others somewhere, I'm pretty sure. But the one we are looking for is Windows Terminal. This is the recommended way of doing it. Just install Windows Terminal and you will be good to go. For that, just copy this ID, clear the screen, Winget install ID, not IDE, just ID. Okay, Microsoft Windows Terminal, and press enter, and that will install my Windows Terminal for you. I already have that, that's the one I'm using, so it will just skip through it. Once you have installed Windows Terminal, just close your PowerShell and open Windows Terminal. The next step is to install a shell. For Windows, we don't have much options. If you would be using Linux, you could install Bash. However, it comes by default in most of the distributions. You could install ZSH or Z-Shell. You could go for Fish, C-Shell, New Shell. There are tons of shells available in Linux. For Windows, we only have two options. Either go with command prompt, which is really outdated and old and, to be honest, terrible. And the modern solution is to go with PowerShell. I'm sure you already have seen the PowerShell in your system because that's the one you opened to install Winget if you had to reinstall it. So the first thing we'll do is we will either install it or upgrade it based on your condition. So Winget search PowerShell. Okay, we'll go with this one, that is Microsoft.PowerShell ID. Okay, we do not want to install the Microsoft Store versions. We want to install the one that it will fetch using Winget. This way we'll have the latest tool. So copy the ID, go with Winget install command, pass your ID and it will install PowerShell as well. Right now I am using PowerShell. I'm using PowerShell version 7.5.2. So you could have your own PowerShell version, whichever you feel like, but just go with the latest one. Once you have installed this, the next one is a text editor or IDE, depending on what kind of project you want to go for. I would recommend to go with the text editor because again, text editor is language agnostic. It does not depend on any kind of language. Okay, you can do any kind of development using a text editor, but IDEs are very much limited to specific language and frameworks. For instance, if you install PyCharm, it will only work with Python related project. You can't do project in any other language. Well, you can, but it won't support any kind of plugins. There won't be any extensions, configurations. It's just not ready for any other languages. Similarly, IntelliJ or whatever tool you want to use, you can install it, but I would recommend just go with the text editor. I would recommend Visual Studio Code because it's a Microsoft product and it integrates really well with your Windows environment. For that, we can again use Winget. Just search code, search VS Code or code, that will be fine. Okay, there's a typo. Winget search, and you could see we have Microsoft Visual Studio Code. This again, copy the ID and use Winget install to install that as well. I have already done that. Now, once you have done that, here comes the tricky part. Okay, it's about deciding what you want. So whenever you're working on a project, you are never working on a single project. If you are working on a single project, then you can install your languages directly, but that won't be the case. Most of the time you will be working on multiple projects. In those cases, you might have to install different versions of single framework or single language. For instance, if you're working on Python, maybe in one project you're using Python 3.8, in another you might be using 3.9, and it's a matter of deciding how do you install which versions. Okay, and if you install everything, it doesn't make sense because you don't want those versions to be available globally. You want those versions specific to your project. So in those cases, you could use some kind of project manager. In case of Python, we have a tool called UV. You could also use Poetry as well, and other tools are there if you want to, but UV is the best one in my experience, so just go with that. And we can use UV to manage different Python versions as well. That's the beauty of UV. Once you have that, it's all about installing UV then instead of installing Python. And you can install UV using Winget. The same trick is there. Just go with Winget, search UV, and it will show you that. So this is the package I'm talking about, which is astralsh.uv. There's a little bit of issue over here. What if you want your project to be reproducible? Which means if someone else is using your same code base to do development work to contribute to your project, they also need to install UV, which they can. But the tricky part is how do you ensure that both of the system will have the same UV version installed? You might be using a different version of UV from them, and you cannot enforce it through your code base. So for that, we have to come up with a clever solution. We have to come up with a tool that could manage all your projects. So for that, I want to introduce you to a project management system called Mise. What Mise could do is it could take care of all your dev tools. Again, it is language agnostic. It does not care what kind of project you're going for, it will have the tool for you. It could also interact with your environment variables, and it could even trigger a couple of hooks if you want to set it up as well. So click on get started. It will take you to the installation page. If you're using Linux or macOS, you could use the curl command, but as we are setting up everything in Windows, we could use Winget. So copy this command, come to the terminal and install it. I have already installed Mise as well, so I'm going to just show you the version of it. I'm using 2025 7.10 version of Mise. So once you have Mise, you could install UV using Mise. Okay, it's really easy. Just go with Mise, install UV, and it will install UV. If I do Mise list, it will show me all the tools that is installed. So as you can see, UV is already installed in my system. But you might have an argument over here that why use Mise to install that if we could do that using Winget? And ultimately we are again doing things manually, then what's the point of it? That would be a good question, but the thing is, with Mise you can have Mise installed in any distribution you want. As you saw that you can install it in Mac OS and Linux. So in any system you could have Mise, and you can use Mise to control your project related requirements. But it's not the beauty of Mise. The best thing about Mise is a config file. You can create a simple mise.toml file in your project, and you could declare which tool you want, what's the version of that tool you are looking for. You could declare your environment variables and other settings, and every time you enter to that project you could run a command, mise install command, which will take care of everything for you. So let me just introduce you to Mise config files. You could run Mise config, okay, and it will show you a path and the tools that is mentioned in that config file. Now over here, as you can see, this path is in my users directory, which basically means it's a global config file. If you want to have it in a project, I have prepared a demo project for you. So if you cd into that, and if I do Mise config, it can detect the config file that is available in that project. So this way you could declare everything within this mise.toml file. So let me switch over to VS Code, and this is the file we have. Over here I have mentioned pre-commit and UV. Then I have mentioned a couple of settings, and I will set an environment variable called channel. So the first thing we'll do is that we need to run Mise install. This will install all the tools. I've already done that, so it's printing me this output. Once this is done, it's time to create a virtual environment. That's something what we do when we're working with Python projects. So UVVENV, this will create a virtual environment. We can even activate this virtual environment, and from my prompt it is evident that we are using Python 3.12.9, and I'm using this virtual environment as well. Once we have that, we can even run that script, which is uv run python main.py, which is available here. If I could just show you the code, it's a very simple code. What this code is doing is it's basically fetching that environment variable and just printing it. That's it. So if I press enter, as you could see, it printed Hyperoot. This is how you could have all your projects set up properly using Mise, and that's all you would need for now. Slowly we'll get into using WSL and Dev container, where we will see other features of Mise as well. But for now, this is all you need to do development work in your Windows machine. Of course, it's not limited to this. You could add other stuff like pre-commit. If you're tracking your code with Git, then having a pre-commit would help you to ensure that certain standards are being implemented before you even commit those changes. Or if you want to follow conventions for your commit messages, then you could use Committizen. That's another tool that you could use, and all those tools are available with Mise, so you don't have to install those separately. You could use Mise to install those tools. You could easily declare it in your system. As you can see, I have declared pre-commit over here, which is installed in the project. I could even do Mise list, and it will list out the tools, and it will tell you the source as well. So you can see the pre-commit and UV is sourced in this project specific mise.toml file or the config file. Okay, so this way you can do that, and there are tons of tools that you could use. Of course, there are some limitations because not every tool was originally created for Windows, so we still have a very small list of tools that won't work with Windows. One of those is like Tmux. If you want to have a terminal multiplexer, Tmux is not available for Windows. And for such reasons, using Linux is still a superior way of doing development work. And even Windows recognizes that. That's the reason we have WSL. This is it for this video, where I have talked about how you could set up your system agnostic way of development workflow. In the next one, I will show you how to set up WSL. Stay tuned. See you in the next one.